had heard and received that message.
The Home Secretary has most definitely got that on the record. I will now continue with the business of the day. The Clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Public Office Accountability Bill, second reading.
Now, Prime Minister to move second reading.
Thank you very much. I beg to move that the bill be now read a second time. Before I come to the bill, Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to put on record in this House my own tribute to the police, the first responders, and in particular to the heroic actions of both the driver and members of staff on board the Doncaster to London train, where such a vile and horrific attack took place this weekend. We all share in the revulsion of this shocking incident, but there's no doubt that their collective action, their brave action, saved countless lives, and I know the whole country is grateful for that. Madam Deputy Speaker, 36 years ago, 97 men, women and children went to a Liverpool football match in Sheffield, an FA Cup semi-final, an occasion of joy, and they never came home to their families. Madam Deputy Speaker, I invite the House just to reflect on that simple statement of fact, what that might feel like. Nearly 15 years ago, when I was Director of Public Prosecutions, I met many of the Hillsborough families during the independent panel led by Bishop James Jones. I will never forget what they told me, their testimony, painful to tell, painful to hear, including the testimony of Jenny Hicks, who told me how she and her husband drove their two teenage girls to the game that day, and they had to drive back later with an empty back seat. Every single story, every single experience, painful to the core, unimaginable to the core. And so, Madam Deputy Speaker, before I come on to the bill and the contents of the bill, I want to begin this debate with a simple acknowledgement, long overdue, that the British state failed the families and victims of Hillsborough to an almost inhuman level. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, those victims and their families, their strength, their courage, their refusal to give up, a determination no matter what was thrown at them, to fight for people they'll never know or meet, to make sure that they never go through something like this again. They are the reason we stand here today with this bill. They are the reason why it will be known as the Hillsborough Law, and they are the reason, Madam Deputy Speaker, why we say clearly again what should have been said immediately, that their loved ones were unlawfully killed and that they never bore any responsibility for what happened in Sheffield that day. And we say it from this dispatch box today. Because, Madam Deputy Speaker, the entire country knows what happened next. You know, we often call Hillsborough a tragedy, but it's more than a tragedy, because the disaster was not down to chance. It was not an accident. It was an injustice. And then further injustice piled on top when the state subjected those families to endure from the police lies and smears against their loved ones, while the central state, the government, aided and abetted them for years and years and years. A cover-up by the very institutions that are supposed to protect and to serve. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, it is nothing less than a stain on modern history of this country. And yet, can we truly say that Hillsborough was an isolated example? No. Because there's also the Horizon scandal, Grenfell Tower, infected blood, the grooming gangs, Windrush, and more besides. and Madam Deputy Speaker, we should also be blunt that there's a pattern common to all these scandals, that time and again the British state struggled to recognise injustice because of who the victims are, because they're working class, because they're black, because they're women and girls. That is the injustice that this bill seeks to correct, and I hope it commands the support of the whole House.
Yeah.
I will.
Most grateful. Would you agree there are a couple of things missing from this otherwise excellent bill? The first is an acknowledgement of the role that the media played in covering up many of the wrongs that happened. And the second is a national oversight mechanism, something that will ensure that when recommendations are made, that they are carried out.
I'm grateful for the intervention, and of course we must acknowledge the role of the media and others played in this. This was a cover-up at so many levels. And in relation to oversight mechanisms, I don't think this bill is the place for that, but I do agree with the proposition that where there are inquiries, there needs to be a better way of ensuring that there's follow-through on those inquiries. I will.
The Prime Minister has listed a litany of scandals where there has been cover-up. Would he reflect and include in that the Chinook disaster, where there has been repeated attempts to cover up the truth, the state of the aircraft that was sent out that night, in which we lost so many valued members of our intelligence service? Isn't that something that now a wrong that now needs to be righted?
For raising that. This bill is obviously intended to deal with all of the situations where there needs to be a duty of candour, with consequences if that isn't adhered to. So I'll just make some progress. I will take further interventions. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, let me now turn to the bill itself, and first of all to the duty of candour. There are three parts to this. First, a new statutory duty of candour. Mr. Speaker, Madam Deputy Speaker, at the Hillsborough Independent Panel, Bishop James Jones found that over 100 statements by junior police officers had been deliberately altered to remove evidence unfavourable to the South Yorkshire Police. 100 statements had been deliberately altered. Madam Deputy Speaker, I don't think there's anyone in this House who could possibly disagree that we must never let anything like that ever happen again. It is a disgrace, and the bill before the House will tackle it. I'll give way.
Shannon.
Can I commend the Prime Minister and Government for bringing this bill forward? I think it enheartens us all to see the content of it. Does the Prime Minister not agree that with the rise of social media, there is more public scrutiny than ever before and less trust in the institutions? The bill and the Prime Minister's outlining is an opportunity to begin that journey of restoring public trust, and we must be mindful that nothing less than accountability can be acceptable. The public understands that mistakes can be made, but they cannot and should not forget when cover-ups take place.
Well, thank you for his intervention, and the bill, the legal provisions to ensure this can never happen again as a matter of law. But I've been clear, and I've said to the families on a number of occasions, it's the culture as well that has to change. The culture has to change. So the bill is the architecture, but the culture has to change of the state. Yes, of course.
I'd like to thank him for giving way. Charlotte Hennessy, whose father, Jimmy Hennessy, was unlawfully killed at Hillsborough, has had conversations with the Prime Minister where he has assured her that the law does not need to be watered down and will be delivered in its entirety. She's in the chamber today. Will he make that promise in this House today?
Absolutely. I made that promise. I looked the families in the eye. I made that promise and I meant it. And I say it again from this dispatch box, this bill will not be watered down. This is such an important re-orchestrating of the relationship between the state and its citizens. It will not be watered down. I'm very pleased to be able to affirm that from this dispatch box. I'll take one more and then I'll press on.
Can I thank the Prime Minister for giving way? Does he agree that one of the most powerful lessons from Hillsborough, and indeed the other Grenfell and post office scandals, is that truth delayed is justice denied, and that while this bill rightly places a duty of candour upon public authorities, it must also compel ministers themselves to uphold that same duty when addressing this House, so that accountability begins at the very top, including the misleading information that was given from that dispatch box by his minister last week in relation to the hooligan Maccabi Tel Aviv fans.
I really think, with the families here in the House with us...
Order, Prime Minister. I was trying to pay close attention, but I may have missed it. We do not accuse each other of misleading information at the dispatch box. So be mindful of the language that one is using. Prime Minister.
Thank you. I also think that we owe the families a better way to have this debate than descending into party political point scoring, and I hope we can continue the debate in that way, because this bill will tackle that injustice, so that when tragedy strikes and the state is called to account at inquiries, inquests and other investigations, public officials, from police officers to the highest offices in the land, will be subject to that duty, which means that an injustice like this can never again hide in some dark corner of the state. Madam Deputy Speaker, failure to comply, failure therefore to act with candour, transparency and frankness, will now carry criminal penalties, including being sent to prison. Yes.
I am very grateful to the Prime Minister, and as a sponsor of the Honourable Member for Liverpool and East Derby's Private Members Bill, I fully welcome this bill's introduction, and I welcome that protections include criminal offences of misconduct in public life. Could the Prime Minister assure me and others that these new offences will be able to be applied retrospectively?
No, they won't be able to, but that's not a deficiency of this bill. That's a long-standing constitutional rule. It's about what moves in terms of offences that move forward. But can I just make this point, because I do think it's important. These measures will apply across the United Kingdom. And I would like to place on record my thanks to the devolved governments for their collaboration on this. I can also announce the government intends to bring forward an amendment to extend the duty to local authority investigations in England, which will make sure that when an inquiry or investigation is set up by a local authority, for example, the Kerslake inquiry into the Manchester Arena bombings, there can also be the duty of cooperation and candour in the search for the truth. I will.
Extremely grateful to the Prime Minister for giving way, and I recognise the strength of the case that he's making. He will understand the interest the Intelligence and Security Committee has in Clause 6 of this bill, which provides for certain exemptions for those who work for the intelligence agencies. What it then says is that those people should report internally within their organisation information that may be of use to an inquiry or investigation. Would he give some thought to how the government might develop the concept of what then happens to that information, about which the bill is broadly silent? And he will understand that many will be concerned to ensure that when information is reported internally within the intelligence agencies, it nonetheless finds its way to those who should have it, in order to make a reassurance of what the government is seeking to achieve, I think, more broadly in this bill.
Thank you for that intervention. Obviously, a lot of thought's been given to that particular issue of the security and intelligence services. What the bill, therefore, does is to be clear that the duty applies, but has a different way of applying it. And I think that gets the balance right. And obviously, there are various national interests to public interests to protect in so doing. I will give way.
I'm very grateful to the Prime Minister for giving way, and I congratulate him and thank him for bringing forward this bill. This represents an epic struggle by the Hillsborough families, and they're to be much admired and praised. But this will extend beyond this, as the Prime Minister has said. Can I thank him on behalf of the families who suffered great loss under the auspices of the Tees Eskin and Weir Valley NHS Trust, Christy Harnett, Nadia Sharif and Emily Moore, as they were lacking that duty of candour when those terrible tragedies struck. And I hope that he can give consideration to a full judge-led public inquiry, because they are in search of truth, justice and accountability.
Well, I thank him for that intervention, and just for his reassurance and for the reassurance of the House and for the families and all the others affected by these scandals. These are provisions in a bill, they're clauses in a bill, they will soon be sections in a piece of legislation. But they're more than that. They're a changing of the nature of the relationship of the state and its duties to its people. And that is so important. Yes, this is the legal architecture, but something much bigger than this has to be put in place. I will take this intervention and I'll come behind.
Thank the Prime Minister greatly, and I welcome this bill. Could I ask him to reassure me and my constituents that those organisations which are contractors to public authorities and public bodies are covered by the provisions of this bill as well, because it's important that where responsibilities defrayed to other bodies, that they too are captured by the clauses in this bill.
She anticipates my next point, but I will make it and then I'll take the intervention from behind, because we have to recognise that some scandals, such as the Post Office Horizon scandal, the boundaries between the public sector and the private sector are complicated. And Clause 4 in this bill applies the duty to some private bodies for that very reason, in answer to her question. In particular, those delivering public functions, those with relevant health and safety responsibilities, as well as relevant public sector contractors. So in the Home Office, in the Post Office case, for Jitsu, for example, for that very reason, because we have to recognise that it's blurred, and we need to make sure that the duty extends appropriately. Yes. I will. No, I'll give way here.
I'm grateful to the Prime Minister for giving way. He knows that for over 2 decades, the legal system failed to provide truth and justice to the Hillsborough families. And it was only a non-legal process, the Hillsborough Independent Panel, that finally set things right on the road to truth, justice and accountability. Does he see any prospect, therefore, of us including in the legislation at a later stage, provision to ensure that a Hillsborough Independent Panel type process can be offered to families who are involved in future disasters to try and circumvent this long-standing failure of the criminal justice system and the justice system to offer truth and accountability quickly to families?
Start by thanking her for her work and campaign on this over many, many years. And she makes a really powerful point about the independent panel. I first met Bishop James Jones 15 or plus years ago now, and I genuinely think he was amongst the first to listen properly, knowing what listening means, to those that were giving evidence to his panel, which is why he was so well received and respected in the report that he made, and we will certainly give consideration as to whether panels of that like in future can serve a useful purpose. I'll take the other intervention.
I thank the Prime Minister for giving way, and he's been very generous in taking all our questions. And I want to congratulate him for introducing this particular piece of legislation. But can I just ask if the duty of candour can be applied fully to all investigations, including independent panels, and not just statutory inquiries, and that the command responsibility must personally rest with those in charge and not simply the institutions?
Well, it does apply to non-statutory inquiries, so her point is covered within the bill. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'll press on. The second part of the duty of candour is a professional duty of candour for all public servants, because the Nolan principles of public service, honesty, integrity, accountability, selflessness, objectivity, openness and leadership, they're not some kind of optional extra, but the very essence of public service itself. So every public authority will now be legally required to adopt a code of ethical conduct based on these principles and set out consequences for staff who do not comply, including disciplinary sanctions up to and including gross misconduct. Yes.
Giving Way, this piece of legislation is a huge step for accountability and transparency for families who must feel like the most impossible of circumstances. Some of those families are living in my constituency and next door in Corby, who are still trying to get clarity about the possibility of dumped toxic waste and contaminated land causing health complications. So could the Prime Minister spell out how this bill will ensure that any public official who abuses their power and tries to cover it up will be held accountable?
Yes, I can confirm that, and I want to emphasise the point again, because it is so significant that out of the most unbelievable suffering, these families, these victims, have pushed for a change that took far too long, but will now benefit and safeguard people that they will never meet, they will never know. And I find that kind of campaigning humbling, and we thank them for it. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'll just make a bit of progress and then we'll take further interventions. Finally, in relation to the duty of candour, it's underpinned by a new criminal offence of misleading the public, which is aimed squarely at public servants who willfully mislead the British people in a reckless, intentional or improper way. Cases like Hillsborough, where lies and dishonesty from the state grievously harmed the very people it was supposed to serve, and that must never happen again. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, the bill is not just about the duty of candour itself, because anyone familiar with how justice failed families and victims must also recognise that the lack of parity in our legal system played a significant role. I remember Margaret Aspinall, who I met many years ago now, who's with us today, telling me that she had to scrape together every last penny for legal representation, including the money paid out by insurers for the death of her son, James, who at the time was pretty much the same age as my son, who comes to football with me. That's what she had to do, and we have to recognise that injustice piled on the other injustices. Yes, of course.
I'm very grateful to the Prime Minister, and can I also join those across this House in welcoming this important legislation and welcoming and aligning myself to all the points the Prime Minister has made. Will the Prime Minister also join me in paying tribute to my honourable friend, the member for Liverpool West Derby, for his tireless campaign to push for this law to reach the statute books? Hear, hear. And the Prime Minister is absolutely right. Grieving families have faced the might of the state alone, forced to crowdfund lawyers while public bodies hired whole legal armies. Does he agree that by guaranteeing legal aid at the inquest we can finally end those David and Goliath battles for justice once and for all? Hear, hear.
Well, can I absolutely extend that tribute to the member for Liverpool West Derby, who I think was at the game and has campaigned tirelessly in this place and beyond this place to help us get to the position today where we can introduce this bill. So I do pay tribute to him. I'm very pleased to do so from this dispatch box as we introduce this important legislation. I'll just make some progress and I will come to the honourable member. Because, Madam Deputy Speaker, on the question of parity, what happened and happens in so many cases is that families either have to scrimp and try to find the money for legal representation or have none. And what are they met with at inquests and inquiries? The Hillsborough families were met with this. The working people who have had to save for justice, they were met time and again by armies of state-funded lawyers, the deep pockets of the state taxpayer money harnessed for the explicit purpose of fighting against justice. So this bill aims to correct this inequality. So justice and the state serve all, with a new duty on public authorities to engage lawyers at inquest and inquiries only where necessary and proportionate, and to ensure that their representatives behave with the sensitivity and respect that victims and their families deserve. Madam Deputy Speaker, the bill will also ensure that no bereaved family has to face an inquest alone, with the largest expansion of legal aid in a decade, granting access to free legal aid for all inquests where the state is an interested party. so that working people like Margaret and the Hillsborough families will never again be faced with such inequality on legal representation, or, as in many cases, simply left with none. I will take the intervention, I promise.
I thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Prime Minister.